Hello and welcome to the Forge's 7th episode of Ignite. Hopefully everybody's keeping well. If you've not joined us before, Ignite is our series of webinars designed to share useful content and perspectives on some of the things that we see going on in the insights and strategy world. So last week we heard from Simon Garnett, one of the founders of The Forge, and he shared his piece, Making the Most of What You Already Know, which is all about extracting more value out of the existing insight investments that you've made. So often companies have a lot of insight that sits inside the organization, and it's all about how you can actually get more out of that. So that's useful for anyone really that's put a hold on any primary research going on now. And if you want to see that video, it's going to be going up live on our LinkedIn feed after this talk. This week we're going to be hearing from Steven, another founder from The Forge. He's going to be sharing a model for understanding behavior change, which we use a lot at The Forge. As with previous talks, if you've got any questions, you can post them in the chat down below. If you want to post them to me directly, I can then field them to Steven at the end. My name's Adam Rolls, so you'll find me in the chat there. But yeah, hope you enjoy the talk. I'm going to hand over to Steven now. Over to you, Steven.
Thank you, Adam. So good afternoon, everyone. Today, I'm going to talk about one of our favorite models here at The Forge, and that's the Fogg behavior change model out of Stanford University. Now, this is an incredibly simple and versatile model. And it's one that we use to some degree on most of our projects. And I think that really comes down to the fact that in some way, all marketing and all brand building activity is about influencing people's behavior. We do find it particularly useful for challenges of driving penetration. So challenges about winning people to your business and brand. As all good students of marketing theory know, penetration is the key to brand growth, certainly according to the work of Beyer and Sharp anyway. So this model is built from the principle that behavior is driven by two key factors: your motivation to do something and your ability to do something. And these can be precipitated by influencing factors that we call triggers. So motivations are about your desire to do a thing or to achieve a thing, and these can come from a place of positivity or negativity. So you could be running towards a really desirable end goal, or you could be running away from a negative consequence. Ability is how easy you find a behavior to complete. And that's again based on a range of factors. That could be about knowledge, time, money, social norms, all of which can act as a blockage to a particular action. Triggers are the interventions that change people's relationship with any given behavior. And crucially, some of these are within our control as business and brand owners, and others lie outside of our control. So the model is built from the principle, this motivations and ability sit on two different axes. On the y-axis, we have motivations, from low motivation all the way through to kind of high motivation to act at the top. And on the x-axis, it's about ability, from low ability through to high ability. Now, this line in the middle is really key. This is the activation threshold. And what this does is it separates out those doing any given behavior from above the line from those not doing a behavior kind of below the line. And you'll see that this line is curved, and that's really important. What does that mean? Well, it means if we take the group of people in red who currently have low motivation to act and low ability to act, we could increase their motivation really highly, exponentially. But unless we also increase their ability, they're not going to cross that activation threshold. So they're not going to do the behavior. Equally, we can make something incredibly simple, incredibly easy for them. But if they have no motivation to act, once again, they're not going to cross that activation threshold. So in this instance, behavior change is about a combination of both increasing your motivation and your ability. The third component of the model I mentioned earlier are kind of triggers. And these are the interventions that, say, change people's relationship with any given behavior. And they fall into three groups. Facilitators are things that make something desirable much easier to do. Signals are about making things that are easy much more desirable to do, and sparks are a kind of combination of the two. You can see more clearly on this slide the role for different types of triggers, because in truth it's very rare to find everyone as a single or homogeneous group in relation to a particular behavior. It's much more common to find people or segments that sit in distinct groups in relation to behavior. Some are doing a thing regularly, some are doing it sometimes, some are doing it not at all. You'll find people who have the motivation to do a thing, but they lack the ability. You'll find people who have the ability, but they lack the motivation. And really crucially, groups with different motivations and different abilities. So you can see in that situation that the triggers can play different roles. Facilitators doing a job of driving people who are motivated across the activation line by making it easier for them to do. Signals driving people over the activation line by making things that are easy much more kind of motivating to do. And sparks working in that middle space. So in simple terms, driving behavior change is about identifying the things stopping people acting and removing them. And it's about identifying the things that could encourage people to act and creating them. And most often, it's a balance of those two things. But what do I mean when I say things? Blockages to behavior can sit at many levels. They might be functional, they might be emotional, they might be sensorial, they might be cultural, legislative, political, all things that could be shaping people's behavior. And these need different types of solution to address them. Some of those might be addressed through innovation, some might be addressed through renovation, communication, education. So it's really important to filter these questions through these factors so you can be precise on what is underpinning the challenge that you're working on. You can be really clear on where the issues sit, because different issues will require different types of intervention and different types of solution. A key rule of behavior change is the tighter you can define your audience and the issues they face, the better you'll be at ensuring you're kind of pulling the right triggers. Let's have a look at a few examples of the model in practice. So I don't know how many people listening now regularly drink 2 litres of water a day. Well, in the UK, we now drink over 3 billion litres, and that continues to grow year on year, 6.15% growth in 2018. This wasn't always the case. And what's interesting, water brands have been selling the idea of drinking more water for years, but that didn't drive a change in behaviour. People had always had the ability to drink more water. That wasn't the issue. So this is a behavior change story that is all about raised motivation to act. And it's all driven by linking water consumption to health benefits. Not in a generic way, but by clearly linking it to different types of healthy outcomes. So different segments, different people can find something relevant to them. That could be about improved performance, improved sporting performance, beauty, digestion, mental focus, different things for people to kind of anchor onto. And the triggers were really important in this story as well. I mentioned that the branded endorsement wasn't kind of working. The endorsement that drove this was expert endorsement from nutritionists, from scientists, sports professionals, and other experts telling these stories, delivered through unbranded journalistic channels, which kind of gave them further credibility. Cycling. In the last 20 years, cycling has increased dramatically and continues to grow in urban areas. And this is a behavior change story where all elements, motivations, ability, and triggers come together to drive the change. The rise initially began with an increase in motivation. You can see there that in the green. And once again, this was a range of different motivations where different people can engage with some or all of them. So there was a notion of kind of, just fitness, free exercise instead of commuting, the enjoyment of being in the open air, financial benefits. A lot of this happened during a time of recession when people were looking to save money. Clear green benefits from more cycling. It's inclusive, family friendly. It's a whole range of things that could get people excited. And once that desire was taking hold, a range of initiatives to make it easier for people. The introduction of cycle lanes and cycle superhighways in cities, making it kind of sort of safer and easier. The introduction of kind of Boris bikes, giving people immediate access to a bicycle if they require it. And even the kind of growth in office showers, make it much easier for people to kind of change and kind of sort of get into work. And triggers played a kind of key role. The bike to work scheme that the government introduced made it financially easier for people who wanted to cycle by acquiring a bike. Petrol prices during lots of this increase were incredibly high, triggering people to seek an alternative. And it was also a time when the great British cycling team was doing incredibly well at the Olympics and the Tour de France, creating a sort of generation of heroes to kind of inspire more people to get on their bikes and act. And it's going to be really interesting to see the impact of kind of the current COVID situation on where we kind of go with cycling as kind of a behaviour. Money's being introduced by the government to kind of sort of facilitate this, take people off the tubes. Really interesting to see how that develops. And from cycling to recycling, the UK currently recycles 44% of its waste. And that there's a target of 50% that the government set by the end of this year. But since 2010, that number's only increased by 3%. To put that into context, Germany currently recycles over 60% of its waste. Now, this is a slightly different journey to the previous examples, because clearly there's a group of people out there who are highly motivated to recycle. But the real challenge here is for the masses. And for the masses, it's about making something that most people are moderately motivated to do considerably easier. So the initial growth in this behaviour was much more about driving ability. So councils investing in infrastructures to kind of make recycling kind of sort of easier for their residents. Alongside kitchen innovations, kitchen bins, segregating different types of rubbish, again, to make it easier. Coloured receptacles, outside, to make it sort of simpler to know where to put your different types of recycling. And really interesting, some recent new triggers that are impacting this behaviour. Lots of councils moving from weekly refuse collection to refuse collection every 2 weeks, but they're picking up their recycling every week. So just kind of pushing people towards a particular desired behaviour. And one final topical example, which I think kind of illustrates that not all behaviour change is planned, and that is the enormous rise we are seeing in online grocery shopping at the moment, surging, week on week, growth of 129%, Ocado reporting revenue up 40% versus the same time last year. So this is an example of a trigger, a really potent trigger to drive behaviour change that's actually done more to accelerate this behaviour than kind of years of branded marketing activity. And if we dig deeper around that kind of behaviour, we can also see that actually what's driving the change isn't necessarily the same for everybody. If we kind of look at the sort of the segments at the bottom, the example of a segment that have adopted this behaviour because they are worried, because they have fear, because they don't want to kind of go to kind of sort of supermarkets. So seeking out an online alternative, even if it is more expensive. But there's other segments that actually see this as appealing, and much more appealing than wasting their time in long queues in order to kind of sort of, kind of get food. And while there's been a net movement towards the behaviour, there are certainly segments out there that are kind of doing this less frequently than they were. People who were online shoppers that simply can't get the delivery slots because other people have swamped in, or because websites have kind of sort of crashed. And what this really illustrates is that behaviour change is rarely a one-dimensional kind of beast, and often involves kind of several factors. So what type of projects do we use this thinking on? And the answer to that is it's a really broad range of consumer and customer strategy challenges. So for example, we were asked to see if we could encourage more people in the UK to start saving money. And the key learning here is that there are very distinct groups of people in the country in relation to this behavior. They have very, very different needs and barriers. As a result of that, they require different types of solution to encourage them to kind of save. We've used it to encourage increased hand washing in African markets. And, the key learning here in terms of, the levers, it was all about actually the social stigma of being seen not to do this thing that was more potent in driving behavior than actually talking about the actual kind of benefits itself. We've used it to increase the usage of deodorants for lighter sweaters. And this was all about finding new motivations that kind of go beyond, the historical odor and wetness kind of control that can drag people into the behavior. We've used it to encourage more people to decorate their homes. And this was really interesting because the going in belief was that actually people didn't do it because they found it difficult, that they lacked the ability. That wasn't the case. The real challenge here was that they lacked the motivation. They didn't really understand what was in it for them to decorate their home versus what else they could spend their money on. We've used it to create and improve click and collect services. And the real headline here was that there were two very different, distinct user groups using kind of click and collect that want a very different type of experience. Therefore, they need different types of triggers to kind of get them into that. And we've used it to drive increased usage of packets of crisps with lunch. And much like the savings example, this was about understanding that there were different types of lunch, each with kind of different barriers. And therefore, actually what you needed to do to kind of get crisps used was kind of very different depending on kind of what you are targeting. So I would just like to end by showing a little bit of example output from one project. And this is from the savings example I mentioned on the other page. What you can kind of sort of see here on this little graphic is we identified, I think it was like 12 or 13 different kind of sort of segments in relation to that regular savings behavior, stretching from people not saving at all, just through people saving a little bit, to some who are kind of sort of, saving kind of sort of regularly, and understanding kind of, where they sit on this motivation and ability kind of curve. But more importantly, for each one of those groups, we were able to kind of, profile them out in a lot more detail, really calling out the unique barriers to each of these people adopting the kind of behavior, so that we can work out what type of intervention is going to work for them, whether that be a product-led, communication-led, education-led. And that meant that we equipped the comms team and the proposition team with kind of clear briefs to help more people save more often. And on that, and what sounds a little bit like a slogan that might have come out of number 10 Downing Street, I'm going to stop. That's 15 minutes and see if anybody has any questions.
Great, thank you for that, Stephen. There are a couple of questions here. Shruti, you've written your question here. Do you want to read it out, or would you like me to read it out? I'm happy to do it either way. Okay, I'll read it out then. So, question here,
Sorry,
Stephen, which is
happy for you to read it out, Adam, if you can make sense of it. Yeah,
I can, Shruti. I'll give it a go.
Okay.
So basically, Shruti's asking is, are we able to say loosely, very loosely, that motivational would be the more softer emotional insights that could be pulled upon, whereas ability might be the more sort of tangible aspects of the product proposition, so packaging or coloured bins? And then you've said very loosely again, so I guess you want to reinforce that point.
No, I wouldn't say that. I think you can have both functional and emotional in both areas. So motivation can be functional, hard benefit, reasons to believe, claims, as well as cultural elements as well. Ability probably does lean a little bit more functional, particularly around kind of sort of convenience. But sometimes it can be, it could be social reasons why people can't do a thing as well. So I think the answer is those factors I shared, the functional, emotional, sensorial, cultural, they can be relevant to both. And it's just about kind of really digging into, the actual behavior and the segments to understand which is the combination of barriers that are stopping people acting.
Yeah, all right. No, thank you. And Stephen, obviously, when you do this exercise, there's so much collection of data that happens, because you're looking at it from so many different lenses. how do you really narrow it down to that killer insight which allows the behavior change to actually happen? Is it just a process of constant filtering that, does that feel right? Does that feel like it's got resonance? Because by the time you've taken a subgroup and you've done all their motivations and their ability, and figured out what the behavior change is likely to be from now to the future, do you then undertake another exercise to really narrow in on that one single reason or insight or trigger or barrier that you can leverage? Like your Africa example, like it was more the social stigma, but I'm sure there were other things that came up in the process.
It's exactly that. There's rarely one single thing, but what you can do is you can kind of work out by which of the elements has got the greatest potential to change the most behavior. So it's about kind of efficiency. So it might be that, you have quite a long list, and if you could do all of them, then you would facilitate an even bigger behavior change. But effectively, it's a little bit like an exercise of, if you were throwing them out of a sinking balloon, which would you want to kind of keep hold of because it's got the greatest potency to influence the most? And the other factor we've not really got into here is about an organization's ability to credibly affect one of those kind of triggers. So some of them just lie outside of your control. So you might know that there's a big cultural thing that you would love to change, but it's quite hard for a branded business to do that. So some of these are about kind of, well, actually, which ones are in our control? What can we do something about, and kind of focus on the ones we can actually activate, as opposed to understanding what the other ones are. And the whole thing about branded and unbranded approaches is really key. So a lot of these kind of projects, understanding, okay, what do we put our name to versus what do we try and execute through kind of, lobbying or unbranded kind of journalistic channels. So you can put together a behavior change kind of plan that's kind of multifaceted. And it's what the real strength is when all those elements kind of come together.
Great, thank you.
Great. Does anyone else have any questions? Okay, well, I think that's time anyway, Stephen. So thank you so much for your time and sharing that with us. Just before you go, just to let you know that we have recorded this session. We'll be emailing it out to people afterwards. You'll also find updates of the stuff that the Forge is up to on the Forge LinkedIn channel. And we also now have a YouTube channel where we're hosting all of these Ignite videos. If you want to go and see previous sessions, you can find details of those in the chat. In the next few weeks, we've got some interesting sessions. We've got some ex-clients coming on to talk about some industries. They're yet to be finalised, but do keep an eye out for the invites for those. They're looking to be good sessions. So thanks again, Stephen.
Thank you, everybody, for joining.
Yeah, thanks, everybody.